Really?
Mm-hmm. 2 are in the Marines, 1's a cop.
Vegetarian?
No, I love meat.
What's your blood type?
O negative, universal donor.
Universal donor.
I just realized, I thought I was just going to turn off my camera, call it a day, and then I realized, oh yeah, I read The Path of Daggers as well. So I have to film 3 reviews back to back. Okay, The Path of Daggers. It's the 8th book in the Wheel of Time. Oh my god, we're in that phase where we're losing count right now. Each entry is acting more as one chunk of an overarching storyline rather than focusing on being like a self-contained story like the earlier books were. In some cases this is great and it works really well, as while still having its own, being kind of self-contained in a way. However, I think The Path of Daggers has unfortunately suffered the most with this. The structure of this book is more similar to something like The Dragon Reborn, where The Crown of Swords and Lord of Chaos, it was like we get maybe a bunch of pages with this character, then we get a couple of chapters with this character, and then next chapters with someone else. Whereas this book, it's like we get 100 pages of one character, then move on to 100 pages of another character, and then like 100 or 200 pages of another character, and then whatnot. It's not like that all the time, there's some outliers here and there, but that's kind of what it is. That's fine. I actually really like that structure in The Dragon Reborn. However, I don't think it works as well here. And I'll tell you why. Is because the individual chapters are dragged the out. Like, how do I explain this? Let's say the opening, actually, the first 100 pages, right? Let's talk about the first 100 pages. Let's talk about a chapter, the individual chapter. This could be any chapter in the book. The chapter would be great. Like, the chapter would be fine. 30% of this chapter, like the last 30% of a chapter, would be great. It'd be amazing. Whether it's a big moment, whether it's a small moment, it's important. And it's like, oh, so this is what the chapter is focusing on. That's the last 30% of that chapter. Because the first 70% is mind-numbing filler. It's mind-numbing filler. So let me take, for example, without spoilers, the first 100 pages is in Elaine and Nynaeve's and Avienda's crew. So this is jumping off right where book 7 ends off, and book 7 sets up some important event that's about to happen. We're like, okay, we've got to see that happen in the opening of this book. This is going to be awesome. It happens after about like 150 pages, and I'm thinking to myself, we had an entire book to set this event up. Why do we need an extra 100 pages to get to this point? And it's like this for most of the book, for most of the storylines. Storylines move, but it's more set up. So, for example, Perrin's book story in the previous book was mostly just him being there, and at the end we get some setup. This book is entirely set up. It's just set up, and it's like we're getting set up again, really. Rand's stuff suffers the same problems as I just said with Elaine and Nynaeve and Avienda's stuff. Although, once again, 30% of that stuff is pretty good, pretty great. However, the 70% of it, it's like, let me describe it to you. Jordan had this much of important, integral, interesting story, right? And he's like, that's not enough to make a full book. So then he just adds, rather than, just like stretching it out or something, he just adds this much of pointless filler to just fatten up this book so it can reach the page count. I don't know what the background is. Maybe Jordan really did intend all of this to be important. Most of it really wasn't. And the funniest part of this, The Path of Daggers is the shortest book so far. It's the shortest book so far, but most of this book could have been trimmed down. And I don't say that on most of the books. Shadows Rising and Lord of Chaos, 2 of the longest books. And those are 2 books where I would not even cut out most of the chapters there. there are multiple pages and pages in here that I would just get rid of. And it's so obvious that there just wasn't enough story in here to account for a full-size book. There just wasn't enough story here to justify for a full-size book, in my opinion. It's just an in-between book. In-between books are fine, but this, it just didn't do a good job of it. Alright, now let me get into the spoilers here. First 100 pages is Nynaeve, Elaine, Avienda, and the whole crew doing the Boral Winds ritual. That stuff is great when you get to it. The actual ritual was awesome. It was just this really visceral chapter. We see them trying to connect with all the I think it's the Ashan Mier, the sea folk, right? And it was a great chapter. And then it leads to a moment where Elaine, Bridget, and Avienda have to unweave this gateway because they have all escaped. And then it just leads to this climactic moment because the Sinchan are here, and it's just events moving after events. It's awesome. It's awesome. And then that freaking gateway explodes, nuclear bomb and everything. Awesome. However, 70% of this 100 pages is dedicated to them going to this location, just them traveling to this freaking farm where the rest of the kinswomen are, and them us being introduced to new characters within this kinswoman and being introduced to this farm that's just going to end up getting nuked. Why did we spend so much more time traveling to this location than actually spending more time on the actual ritual itself, the actual event we're building up to? I didn't enjoy it. And we spent so much time going to this freaking farm that's going to be nuked anyway. The rest of their storyline is just, and it's mostly them traveling to Camlin because Elaine had to take up the Lion Throne. Finally, that kind of stuff I don't mind. It's like the traveling stuff for the beginning of this storyline, in the Bowl of Wind stuff, that was pointless. This stuff I don't mind as much. Some interesting stuff happens in the latter half of this storyline. Good character interactions. We're seeing them set up some new storylines with this secret Black Arja member within the Rebel Aes Sedai crew. It's fine. Mostly just filler for their storyline, unfortunately. Perrin's storyline was hindered because of this. We would get really interesting stuff with Perrin and this conflict between the Wise Ones, because he doesn't like the way that the Wise Ones are treating Aes Sedai as essentially the Rebel Aes Sedai as kind of like slaves. There's some hostility between the two, not just the Wise Ones, but the Rebel Aes Sedai. They want Perrin to kill Massima. Perrin doesn't want to kill Massima. This is something he's also conflicted with. This is all great stuff, but all of this amazing introspective internal conflicts is just saved up for the last 30% of his chapters. Like Nynaeve and Elaine's storyline, 70% of his chapters, 70% of his storyline is him walking around a camp with Aram acting like a freaking side boob for him. Just him walking through a camp, talking with boring, uninteresting side characters and doing nothing. I just wish we could have explored more of the internal conflicts Perrin is facing in this book. However, the last chapter sets up a really interesting storyline with Perrin and Fail for the next book, but that's just one chapter. Rand, also a victim of this. So after A Crown of Swords, Rand has become the king of Illian. He's gathered an army of Illianers, Terrans, and Andorans. There's hostility and conflict between all these different groups, which was fine to read about, even though most of that conflict is, even most of the pages about these rifts between these different armies is mostly focused on random side characters within these armies, like generals and stuff that you're not going to remember the names for. All these petty grievances and stuff between the armies is interesting to read about. However, we spend way too much time with frustrating lords and generals and side characters who you're not going to remember the name of. Rand is now trying to battle the Sinchan, which are in Altara now, and 70% of the battle sequences and whatnot is just dedicated to this, just traveling, boring side characters that you don't want to read about. However, what I did like about Rand's storyline is this background. In the background, we're seeing the Ashan Man going slightly unhinged. Not just Rand, but so the Ashan Man themselves are slightly going crazy. We're getting all these other side characters like the Shiva and whatnot. We're seeing in the background that they're talking to themselves, they're going crazy, and this leads up to the ending, which I liked. I liked the ending for this book. But before we get to the ending, Rand himself, with the previous two books, there was a large focus on his madness and his descent. In this one, it's all about his arrogance and his hubris, and especially that moment where they're battling the Sinchan, and he gets one of his Ashraman to retrieve Kalandor, and then he just unleashes just insane amounts of power, no control over it, and he's responsible for some of the deaths of his own armies as well, right? Almost god complex come at a halt right here. Also, what I do like about the battle against Sinchan, when you do get to the battle of Sinchan, I like it because it's mostly just battle tactics. Rand is in the background over here. He's not fighting in the war that much, so it kind of gives you a more of an omniscient perspective on the war, which I actually really enjoyed. I actually kind of like that change of pace. However, once Rand does return to Kaehyun with Min, and then we see the Ashraman snap. Some of them have turned traitor, and they've just gone crazy and just, started attacking the palace in Kaehyun. That was a great climax. I really enjoyed that. And there were some emotional moments where one of the Ashraman, who was a young boy, who's also the madness has affected him to give him the mind of a young child, and Rand essentially commits an act of euthanasia. And once again, it's these smaller moments that I really love with Rand that really kind of adds pathos to the character and really makes you understand the enormity of his situation and just these morally conflicting decisions he has to make. Gwen's storyline was the least affected by the unnecessary elongation and just filler that we see in the Path of Daggers. This also means that Gwen is a lighter presence in here, but I really loved Gwen in this book. Just Gwen as Amyrlin C is so cool. I just love reading about it. We're seeing her finally tackling the issue she has with the rebel Aes Sedai. She really is just a puppet for them, and she is a scapegoat. We're seeing her finally break this label that's been placed on her. We're seeing her finally truly become the Amyrlin C with that amazing chapter where she commences war against Eleda and the White Tower, which in doing so gives her complete power over the Aes Sedai. You're just seeing Gwen becoming a politically powerful character in the narrative right now. Just love to read it. Seeing all the subtle manipulations of the Aes Sedai trying to manipulate Gwen, and seeing her trying to manipulate them back. We also get some of the interlude chapters with other characters. So we see some chapters from the perspective of Graendal, that Forsaken, right? The really horny Forsaken. That has like a bunch of sex slaves. This new player being introduced, Moradin, I think his name is. He's kind of this personification of death, this new chosen who's using the true power or something like that. And we're seeing him, other Forsakens like Mogadin and Graendal are now submissive to him now. Shada Haran or something. We're seeing the Forsaken becoming submissive to these greater powers, and it's all intriguing stuff right now. It's already been introduced. It doesn't move forward that much. It's interesting stuff here. Another interesting thing with Perrin's storyline, we're kind of seeing this converging of storylines. So we have like Perrin's storyline, Morghase's, and Masaman's here, and we're seeing all three of these finally converge. We see Perrin run pathways with Morghase, and we're seeing these two storylines converge with each other. Although once again, that we don't get much emphasis on this. We don't get much on this. It's great to see all these different threads finally coming together. We also get some interlude chapters on Savannah and the current Shaido. Obviously, we've seen them work. In the previous books, they were working with Graendal and Samael. Because of Samael in the previous books, I think they're in Altara. I think they're in Amadis, yeah. So we're seeing some stuff with Savannah and the Shaido and what they're getting up to now. And once again, like all the other background characters, it's mostly just an update on what they're doing right now. It doesn't move forward too much. This book sets up storylines pretty well. However, most of this book is just filler. It's pointless, unnecessary, just walking around. 2/3 of this book is just really just packed with unnecessary filler, and whereas 1/3 of it is actually really interesting stuff that should have had more emphasis on. The reality is this is an in-between book that's supposed to converge storylines and kind of bridge the pathways to bigger storylines later on. However, in doing so, there's just pointless pages of stuff that does not need to be there. And even though this is the shortest book in the Wheel of Time, it could have been short. And that's what I can tell. There's just not enough story in this to justify this being as long as it is. Stretching out events that could have been just told in a couple of chapters. I do understand the purpose of this book is to fill certain gaps and to serve the overarching storyline and converge storylines together. However, it's not concerned with being a good self-contained book within itself, which is where the book kind of suffers in my opinion. Overall, I'm gonna have to give this a 6 out of 10. I think this might be the weakest book in the Wheel of Time so far, which is unfortunate because once again, there was stuff I really did like in here. But I can't ignore the fact that for 2/3 of this book, like, I don't think the Wheel of Time is slow. Each of the individual books, even stuff that I wasn't necessarily completely positive on, like Eye of the World and The Great Hunt, they still move. Like, the individual books move quite well. You never catch me like reading a Wheel of Time book and my eyes just dozing off. However, this is the first time where I was reading the book and my eyes were kind of dozing off, and I was like, I was kind of getting bored, and my mind was just wandering places. This is the first time it happened in the series so far. Overall, the actual events that happened here, I enjoyed. I like where the story is moving. For me, it's like I like the meat. It's the bones I have a problem with. It's the structure. It's the pacing that I have an issue with. For me, even though the story is moving into interesting places, more exciting places, this book for me was the one I enjoyed the least, if I'm being honest with you, and it's like a huge jump down from the previous entries. Anyway guys, tell me in the comment section below what you thought. If you haven't read the whole of the Wheel of Time, please use spoiler-free comments, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.